So, welcome to our February seminar, everyone. I am super pleased to welcome Bryan Falchuk. He is going to be talking today about making your toughest relationships work better. So, Bryan is the best-selling author, speaker, and life coach. He's faced major adversities, from obesity to running marathons to career struggles, and he was on our podcast already. And he's super fun and articulate. So, I will not delay your introduction more. Bryan, welcome to our
Awesome.
seminar. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Sam. Should I just jump in, or
Yeah,
you want to?
no,
You
just
tell me.
jump in, and then we've got a few people on the call. Do you want to speak and then have questions after? Or are you happy for people to just kind of chime in if they want to ask as you're going along?
I'm a very passionate person, so sometimes you have a burning question that has to get answered. So if people feel that way, they can certainly jump in. If you want to hold it to the end, that's fine too. But if there's something that's just like, wait, I don't understand what you mean, or I have to share this, that's totally fine with me.
All right, sounds good. So go for it. Take it away.
Excellent. So I want to share an idea. The background there is my book Do a Day that I talked about when I was on the show before, but I want to talk about something that is it's the basis for my next book. It's something I've been working on for a really, really long time. A lot of research, both firsthand and just reading a ton to try to pick apart something I know everybody, literally everybody faces. And I did a TED talk on this, and I asked, how many of you have tough relationships? And I think maybe 20% of the room raised their hand. And what I'm guessing is the people who didn't raise their hand were probably sitting next to the person with which they have one of their toughest relationships and were afraid to raise their hand, or they just weren't being honest, because this is a really universal thing, right? We all have difficult relationships, whether that's an ongoing relationship that's really hard. A lot of people struggle with their spouses or their parents or coworkers, or something light and simple, like, a stranger that you get stuck in traffic with. That's a story that I shared in that talk. Someone who cuts you off in traffic, or someone who cuts you in line, or, I mean, these are all relationships, and they are points of potential difficulty in our lives. And the question is, how do we face them? How do we interact with them? And so in living with my own tough relationships, I started to realize something, that like most people, I always thought I was right. I never thought I was the reason why there was a difficulty in the relationship. But it really doesn't matter if you're right or wrong or the source of the problem. You can still drive the solution. You have more agency in the equation. You have more power in the equation than you may give yourself credit for. And it started to come together into an idea that I've been calling the 50, 75, 100 solution. And that's what I want to dig into. What is this mixing of numbers all about that no one ever seems to remember? Which is it? 25, 50, 75? It's 50, 75, 100. I want to explain what the numbers mean, and then I think you'll understand why they are what they are. But there's a bit of background we have to jump into, and this is where my research really played the most active role. It's 3 ideas that come from Buddhism. They're 3 core Buddhist principles that all tie to the overarching Buddhist desire to end suffering. And they are happiness seeking. It's the first one. Interdependence. And the last one is impermanence. I want to explain each of the 3 of these, and then I think we'll jump into the numbers, and it'll all make some more sense. Happiness seeking is a very basic principle that's at the core of all humans. It's what drives us. We ultimately are just seeking to be happy. That's why we do what we do. And if you think about situations where you've dealt with someone who's being difficult or who is just hurting you, it may be hard to see them as just trying to be happy, right? It seems like they're just trying to hurt you or to hurt us. And actually, we may not understand their reasoning, but that doesn't mean that they woke up that morning with the sole intention of causing us harm or pain. They, just like us, want something, and sometimes we stand in their way. An easy way to think about it is, I always call this the last cookie problem. When there's only one cookie left, we can't both have it if we both want it and both be happy, right? We could split it, but then we'd each get half of what we really wanted, and we'd be wanting for more. If I get the last cookie, you don't get it. My happiness stands in the way of yours. And this is the classic traffic jam problem. And I shared this story in the TED Talk, but this is when it really hit me just how powerful happiness seeking can be. I was coming home from the airport. I was exhausted from a long flight. There's tons of traffic, and I was pretty miserable. I just wanted to get home, and we were going maybe a kilometer per hour, barely moving. And this guy in this white van with a plumbing company logo on it cut in front of me. And normally I would probably have gotten very worked up. I'd start shouting and maybe swearing at him or calling him names or whatever. Not that he could hear any of that, but I'd be expressing my anger, and then I would probably try to cut back in front of him. And that's a pretty typical traffic reaction, not just for me, but for lots of people. And what I realized is he didn't get on the highway to find my car and cut in front of me, right? I haven't been sought out, and been wronged here. He's just trying to get to where he's going, just like me. And for whatever reason, he decided that getting one car further ahead was worth it. And I happened to be that one car, right? He didn't plan his whole day around wronging me. When you start to look at it that way, you start to realize, well, we're all sort of the same here. I wanted to get home. He wants to get wherever he's going. And for him, it may be home. It may also be that, some family just had a burst pipe. He's a plumber and he's trying to get there to save their house from flooding, or, any number of emergencies where he's not just doing it for himself, but there are people depending on him who are in a bad place. So when you think of that, surely you'd want him to get there faster. That's a bigger deal than me getting home 45 seconds or whatever him being in front of me just cost me. Getting home that much faster just is not as relevant as getting him to where he's trying to go. But more importantly, it helped me not to feel attacked. And when I didn't feel attacked, I didn't respond in the same way. So I actually ended up smiling, which sounds silly. And some people are like, oh, well, you're an easy target now. Anyone can cut you off because you'll just let them and smile. It's just, I still want to get to where I'm going, but at least I recognize that this is not a person who's trying to stand in my way. He's not doing this to me. There's no maliciousness in it. And when you think of things that way, it's easier to step down your reaction and not get as heated, which means you're not going to contribute to the anger of the relationship as much. Because surely if I cut him off or I started to drive in a more aggressive way, I could get in an accident. Someone else could get even angrier at me. It's just an escalation path. So it kept me from doing that. So that's really important. And that's the essence behind happiness seeking. The second piece is interdependence. And the idea here is that we're all connected to each other. Everything we do and think and feel, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's about our relationship to other people, other things. And all those things change, right? You can have a great relationship with someone, yet still fight with them. Many spouses have these huge fights, but they love each other very much. Kids will, go stomping off in the distance, angry at their parents and saying how I'm never going to be like you, but they still love their parents and they still come back to them. We have good relationships that have difficult moments, and we have difficult relationships that have moments that aren't so bad. This is the same reason why bullies, really mean people, still have friends. It's because we're interdependent. So who we are is not permanent. I'm not always good or always bad. I'm not always easy to get along with or always bad to get along with or always mean. I am those things in different situations with different people. And that idea helps us realize if you change the situation, you can change the dynamic of the relationship. So if you give someone some interaction, some style that you're acting in, some word choice, some body language for them to process, they're going to respond a certain way. If you give them something different, they may respond differently. So that interdependence reminds us that we're all interconnected, and it's those interconnections that drive the way we think of each other. Right? We're not always good or always bad. We change, and we can be changed. We can be influenced to change. So that's the second idea, interdependence. The third, impermanence. It's really about hope. This is the notion that nothing stays the same, right? It means if you're dealing with someone who's hard on you, or someone who's mean, or any of the negative words we use to describe people on the other end of a tough relationship, it doesn't have to be that way all the time. They can change. All things change, right? That's the famous saying, the only constant is change. Well, it's very true. Nothing stays the same forever. And if you think that way about it, about a tough relationship, you realize no matter how bad it is, no matter how mean the person seems to be or how stuck in their ways they seem, it can still change. Even if only slightly, it can still change. And that bit of hope suggests to us that it's worth the work. We should try. So we've got happiness seeking that helps us feel less attacked and step down our reaction to things and maybe give us some space and some perspective. So then we can see the interdependence that a different situation, a change in the circumstances, a change in the style can yield a different type of relationship. And impermanence tells us it's worth it. It can work because everything ultimately changes. So those are the three underlying core ideas that if you take these in, you start to see the path forward. And that's where the math comes in. So before I jump into the math, does anybody have any questions or points or curiosities around those three core principles? No? Good. All
Super
right.
interesting so far. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so true.
Yeah, it is. And the thing is, we all have moments where we forget this. Even me, who's been studying it for a while and writing a book on it, it's okay. It's work and it's a process, and that's fine.
You also have your bad moments. It's fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Now the numbers. So this is the part where some people scream because they don't like math. They say they don't like math, but I invite you to remember that's impermanent. You can change and you can like math as well. It's not really that mathematical, just an easy way to frame things. So these numbers are about different proportions or different shares of the total relationship. That's the 100 number. It's this whole relationship. And the question is, how does it break into components that we can then move into a better place? The first number is 50, and that's one people generally get right off the bat. 50-50, I own my half, you own yours, right? Every relationship has two sides to the story, and you're responsible for you, I'm responsible for me. That's the 50% that we each hold. Now within me, this is where we're going to start to build to the 75%. I'm then split in half. And my half is, part of it is what I'm actively choosing to put out into the world. Those are my actions. That's what I'm independently thinking of, feeling, doing, how I'm behaving, me in and of myself. The other half of me comes from the way I react to you. And those are my reactions. So I'm split half and half, 25% shares of the total, if you will. But half of me is what I'm actively choosing to put out into the world, and the other half is how I'm reacting to what you have chosen to put out into the world. And the thing is, you have that same split. Half of you is what you're independently arriving at as your actions to put out towards me. And the other half is how you're reacting to what I'm giving to you. So if you look at that, we've got 4 quarters, right? The 2 reactive halves and the 2 active halves. Because half of you comes from my behavior as your reactions. That means that I own my 50% of the total, but I influence 50% of your half, or 25% of the total. Add that up, and that's the 75. The idea being, if I can change my actions and my reactions, I've moved 50% of the relationship better, or 50% of the inputs into the relationship to a better place. And by extension, because that's what drives your reactions, I've then also moved another 25%. So I can directly and indirectly impact, control, influence 3/4 of that difficult relationship. And when that hit me, I suddenly felt power and control in situations where we feel powerless and out of control. We feel that no matter what we do, the other person is always going to be a certain way to us. And actually, we can move the needle. We can influence a change in their behavior by giving them different behaviors on our part to interact with. That's where the 75 comes in. And when you move 75% of a problem to a better place, you soon get to 100% better. So that's the idea behind the numbers. And it's about how we influence the other behavior by looking at our own differently, making different choices in how we respond. Elena, your mic just became active. Do you have a question or point you want to jump in with? No. Okay. So I want to give an example because I think that helps to put everything in perspective. But ultimately what this is about is choosing to be different. So when someone's mean to you or difficult to you or wrongs you, that word choice may feel offensive, right? Some people say, well, I didn't choose for them to do this to me. And that's right, you didn't. You may not have chosen the action on their part, or maybe it was a reaction. Sometimes it's hard to discern. But you can choose whether it affects you enough to make you act differently. Right? That traffic example was a really easy way to see that. I could have chosen to behave in the same way I thought he was behaving. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he's just trying to get somewhere and was blind to what was around him. But I chose to react differently. I felt wronged and I looked at it and controlled it and decided I'm going to put something else out into the world. When someone yells at you, you can get defensive, you can get offensive, you can yell back at them, or you cannot do that. You cannot respond with name calling. You cannot respond with a raised voice. You can take the high road. You can choose to walk away. You can choose any number of things that don't meet them at that point of escalation. Those are all choices. They may be hard. You may have your blood boiling inside and want to lash out, but you don't have to. And of course, the greatest leaders in the world, the greatest leaders through history, the most inspiring people chose that path of non-reaction. If you think of Gandhi, you think of Buddha, you think of the Dalai Lama right now. These are revered people who choose not to respond in kind. And it has always served them. Yeah, that's ultimately how Gandhi was able to achieve what he achieved. So we don't have to meet anger with anger. We can step down and take a more logical, rational, controlled path. And when you do that, you stop feeding fuel into the fire that you're receiving. So this example from my life. I had a coworker, this is called Management 3.0. I thought it should be a business example. I had a coworker who was absolutely brilliant. She was a former trial attorney. So she's very good at arguing. She's used to being attacked and attacking back, and quite frankly, used to winning because that's what she did. She's excellent at it. She's brilliant. She knew how to pull an argument together, and she was ruthless and quite relentless. She would not back down, which is fantastic if she's on your side. If she's not on your side, it is incredibly difficult because she will come for you, and go right for the jugular, try to take you down. Interestingly, she was actually my predecessor in the role that I was in. And she had done a great job, but there were some things that didn't go so well. And it's not really her fault. There were a number of good reasons for it. I think she did a great job with what she had to work with. But some of those issues were creeping up and were playing out in our results. And I was trying to fix them. And I wasn't doing it in a way that cast blame, but I think you probably understand in my addressing them or in my raising the issues, I think she felt a bit attacked, or she felt like someone was exposing her mistakes. I never said, she did this, and so now we're dealing with this. It's like, this is happening. Here's what we're going to do, and we'll get through this. I didn't totally realize that at the time, that she was probably taking this as a threat to her reputation or someone calling her out. But that's how she took it. And I couldn't control that. But that's the way she took it. And she resultantly thought of me as a threat. And so she decided she would take me out before I took her out. I wasn't trying to take her out. That was the last thing on my mind. She's really good at her job. And I think she did a lot of great things for the company. So that just never even crossed my mind. But she saw it that way. And so one Friday evening, she sent an email to me, our CFO, and our boss, the CEO. And it was this long bullet list of all these terrible things that I had done and was doing, and the ways that I'm incompetent and ruining the company. And here's the outcome of all of my terribleness. So she basically sent the CEO an email with myself and the CFO on it about why I need to be fired, was essentially what her argument was, which was a great email to get at like a 7 p.m. on a Friday night as you're trying to go into a weekend and enjoy it. And so I read that email and I had a choice. I could respond in anger, which is what I was feeling at the time. I could lash out at her. Now, she listed all of these facts. The thing is, they weren't actually facts. They weren't true. She said the number of X's is this, and actually it was 2 times that. We're only making this much money. Actually, we're making quite a bit more. Or we're losing this much. We weren't. So she had all these facts that were essentially either made up or she was confused about them. And I don't know which one it was, but they weren't true. And you put them together and they paint a very negative picture. If you put together the actual facts, the picture is quite different. So I could have refuted everything. But what I realized is in that moment, none of that's going to work out, because I'm going to look defensive and angry and reactive, and she's going to bite. And she's probably going to win because she's a much better arguer. And she's also very highly respected in the company. So, and I was new. So, the cards were not stacked in my favor. And getting into a battle with her over email was not the right path. So I did something very unexpected and different. I know this is not what she thought would happen. She thought I would start lashing out and then she could engage and take me down. That's what she's used to. So instead, I sent an email back that started with 2 words, "Thank you," which I know she was not expecting. And then instead of getting into a battle over all these points, I simply just said, I have a different view of the data that you're talking about, but that doesn't matter. So I essentially dismissed my whole ability to argue with her about the points, which she also wasn't expecting. And then I recognized the ultimate point she was making was about some bad outcome for the business. And tied to that, she wanted me to go. But really, she cared most about the impact of the business, and she thought I was a threat to it. Now, maybe that was because she saw me as a threat to her or for some other reason, but she ultimately, her happiness was about the business. And so I just said, what you're saying in terms of the negative impact, that's really important. Why don't I find us all some time to sit down and talk about it? And I did that. So I got time for us in a couple of days. We all came together over video conference because we're in different cities. And sure enough, just like in the emails, she came armed. She was had all of her facts, and she came right out the gate yelling about everything that was so terrible that I was doing. And I just sat there and I let her speak. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't get worked up. I wasn't, gripping onto the armrests in my chair, waiting to pounce. I have a heart rate monitor on my watch, so I got to see my heart rate actually stayed calm. So this wasn't me gritting my teeth and pretending to be calm, because of course my body language would tell a different story. I actually was calm. And the reason was none of what she was doing had to matter. I had chosen not to let that affect me because ultimately I knew none of that was true. And I knew that this whole personal attack is really not the issue. And if I can get us to focus on the impact to the business, then I move us to a better place. Then I move us to focusing on happiness, not attacking. That was me trying to live 50, 75, 100 in real time while I'm being attacked. It's not easy, but I knew if I could do that, I would not only look better to the CEO because I'm not engaging in this sort of, unprofessional, erratic behavior, but I will also get a chance to get to what matters instead of giving her an opportunity to set up a stronger case for why she thinks I need to go, or losing the back and forth battle with her over whose facts are right. So I let her speak. And when she was finished, I thanked her, which again, she was definitely not expecting. I don't know many people who say thank you after they've been like berated for 10 minutes with all these facts about how incompetent they are. But I thanked her. And then I asked her, what's her goal here? And that did 2 things. It forced her to define happiness, but it also made it clearer that this game she's playing, she would have to be honest about playing that game or back down from it. Because if she was to say to the CEO, well, I just want to get you fired, that wouldn't look great for her. And I think she knew that. So she'd never said those words directly, but her actions made it pretty clear. But she wasn't about to sit there and do that. So it actually allowed for her to step down a little bit, to bring things back to a professional place, and maybe to abandon that because it made her realize she's not in a place where you can say something that dramatic. But it also got her to focus on what really matters, which was the business. And she claimed that was her purpose in the initial email, and it forced her to bring it back to that place so we can move past all of these so-called facts that just really weren't. I know it may seem like, I'm biased because I was on the receiving end, so of course I say the facts weren't true, but it was just, and that's the good thing about the CFO being there. She was stating all of these numbers about the performance of the business, and we had the profit and loss statement. It just, none of it was true. And I don't know if the CEO knew that or not. We could certainly get into it, but the numbers are the numbers. There really was no getting around that. So I asked her what she really wanted. And she stated more clearly than the version in her email what she was worried about for the business and what she wanted to achieve for the business. And the thing is, regardless of what she thinks of me, that stuff's all right. What she's worried about, she should be worried about. And whether it would come true or not, it's a different story, but there are actions we certainly needed to take in relation to that fear that would help the business out. And what she wanted for the outcome, that was a good thing. That was something we should all want for the business. I can't argue with that. So instead of keeping it in this back and forth defensiveness place about all these bullet points, I moved us to talking about happiness, which it's pretty hard to argue with that. With that plumber, if he told me, I know I cut you off, but I'm trying to get to this place and you're driving too slow for me, I could talk about the speed I was driving all day and how the traffic was making me slow. It wasn't my fault. What difference does it make? But if we can talk about where he's trying to get to and why that's a good thing, that's a totally different interaction. So when she shared that point about the business, I said, yeah, I agree with you. I think we should do that. I think she saw me as a blocker to that outcome, maybe because of my incompetence, maybe because she thought I was standing in her way or calling out mistakes from the past or whatever. But by my agreeing with it and then saying, how can I help us get there? Or I have some ideas about things we can do. What do you think about that? Suddenly, instead of a blocker to her happiness, I was a facilitator of it. You don't want to take out someone who's facilitating a better outcome for you. So I was able to move this conversation, this whole attack, into a better place. Now, what I won't say is we became best friends. We actually had been friends, so this whole thing's a little bit weird. But we didn't go back to that. We didn't get along really well. We didn't hold hands and go skipping into the distance. Things were still tense, but she never came for me again. She never pulled an attack like that again. She never questioned my capabilities or my intelligence again. We didn't enjoy each other's company. We didn't spend a lot of time together, but we were able to work together and we were able to do those things that we talked about in that meeting. And we weren't able to improve the outcomes for the business, which is ultimately all that mattered. So it's not like 50, 75, 100 takes a terrible situation and makes it perfect. That's not the real world. But it did move the needle on it. And it did set in motion a path towards getting better. Right? Every interaction was easier. I still wouldn't call it great, but it was easier and better. And she ended up leaving about 6 months later. I think if she stayed, we'd be in a better place now because she would have seen how things played out and maybe she would have stepped down her angst about everything. So it did set things in motion. And I have other relationships where, they weren't one-off relationships like that traffic incident. But there were situations where people were butting heads, myself included. And we put things in motion. And no, it wasn't perfect immediately, but it did get to a place where there was respect, there was an ability to work together, and even in some cases, a newfound friendship that you could not have seen happening from before. So it's a really interesting way to step back, look at what really motivates us, which is not attacking and harming each other, but actually what we seek for ourselves that sometimes comes at someone else's expense. and recognizing that instead of seeing life as an attack, so that you can step back, so that you can recognize the interdependence we have and how changing the situation, changing what you give someone to interact with.
Shout out, but the chats first. I can't see anyone. It's really strange. Elena, Suzanne, Ricard.
Hello? Guys?
Aggressive. I think it's just the beginning to start not to do it. So it's in my conscience, not in my unconscious mind. So whenever it happens, maybe I will try to explode, but I will think, no, I won't explode it. A few years from now, but it's difficult because I'm too emotional, and I need to have my mind just always trying to be clear and open to not to do this.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. No, I
I
think
don't know
that's
if
really
I'm right. I'm just agreeing with you.
That's good. And you're right. It is tough. And that's when I use the word choice. It can be hard for people because you feel wronged. That's a natural and normal way to feel. There's nothing wrong with that. And the more that we practice, the more that we try, the easier it gets. So this is work for the long haul, as is most work around making yourself better. It's not like you hear it once and you're done, right? You practice, you continue, you remind yourself of what matters, you reflect on the times when you didn't behave the way you wish you did in hindsight. And it does get better. The brain starts to rewire.
Yes, for sure.
Thank you for the thoughts.
Yes, I appreciate it.
Bryan, we had some people write in questions.
Great.
Before you came on, so I'm just going to read some of them.
Okay.
How do I communicate business risks and threats to an egocentric director?
Wow. So there's a recurring theme in all of this, and it's around trying to figure out the person's happiness. And the nice thing about someone who's egocentric is they would love to tell you all about what they're thinking, especially what makes them happy. And we've all worked with people like this. We all know people like this. It's about them. And when you ask them, I'd love to hear what you care about most in, frame the context about this issue, about the business, about whatever it is. They want to tell you. They want to tell you pretty badly. So you asking actually opens the door right up to learning the linchpin for you, the thing you need to know to be able to unlock the better reaction from them, or to give you the insight into how you should structure your discussion in a way that will resonate with them, because they'll tell you plainly what they care about. And when you hear that, then think about, how does that relate to the issues you need to discuss? How can you frame them in a way that ties to that thing that they care about most? So that's the trick for me. And that's the theme really in any sort of difficult interaction. If you can get to a place where you really understand that person's happiness, and you may have to ask them, don't just presume what it is, find out what's really driving them. Then you can start to reframe things or recast things, look at them differently. in relation to what they're actually trying to achieve rather than what you think they're trying to achieve at your expense.
It sounds like a mix between meeting them where they're at and ego stroking a little now.
Yeah. And I mean, but that's, you know, we don't like to interact with people like that often, or we, you know, we get nervous about it or kind of roll our eyes. But actually, even though that's a difficult personality to deal with or can be tiring, it does have a pretty easy path to unlocking what you need to unlock for this to work out. So that's the upside to it, is they're usually pretty transparent to care about, because it's about them. And when you ask them about them,
Yeah, no, very, very good point. We have about, we have a couple minutes left. Who else has questions? This has been such an interesting discussion. Maximize your time, people. This is like a very, you know, we're lucky to get so much of Bryan. Does anyone else have a question, or I can also just pull from other things people wrote in on. I'm just looking. How do you navigate an employee who doesn't want to work with you and wants everyone in the office to know that? He also makes it clear when he does not like others in the office. I feel like that's a tough one.
That is a tough one. It depends what your position is. So if you're that person's boss, then there's definitely a people management component to that. And not just because they don't like you, but it's the poisoning of what's around. That's the piece that you need to engage in as a leader. So that's one path. And I'm always of the mind that I would rather turn someone around than get rid of them. Because that's who I am. I like to work with people, and I'd love to unlock things with them, but not always possible. So if you're not in a leadership role, or maybe the person has just gone too far, then it's a tricky thing to try to interact with. Again, if you can figure out what the issue is, why they don't like you, you may find, you know, that path forward. I had a classmate in business school, which, you know, it's school, so it's a bit different, but it's business school, so it was sort of work-ish. We all had to work together quite a bit, and the dynamic was quite professional. But I had a classmate who, for whatever reason, we just did not get along, and we were a part of the same groups quite often, and we just, like, it never felt right. And I remember he asked me what I did one evening, like, oh, you know, what were you up to? Just trying to make small talk. And I told him I was at the gym, and there were a few other people there. And one of the people I named was this girl who I knew, or this woman, we were in our 20s, who I knew that he liked. And he got very worked up all of a sudden. And it started just yelling at me about how I made this whole thing up to make him feel insecure because I could go to the gym with her and he can't. And I was just like, you know, where in the world did you just like, I don't think about you this much. I didn't bring anyone to the gym. I didn't go with anybody. I have a girlfriend. She has a boyfriend. Like, none of this happened. But that's how he was seeing things. And it just became very clear to me. He's creating this sense of being attacked, and regardless of what I'm doing or not doing. And so it got to a place where I wanted to move past all this. So I reached out to him and I said, you know, for whatever reason, we've seemed to have some difficulty in our relationship. Can we just sit down and talk about it? I'd love to understand if there are things that I'm doing or saying or feeling that are making you feel a certain way about me. So I didn't make it anything about him. So it's not, you know, like, you're treating me this way, you're reacting inappropriately, you're being crazy, like whatever it was that I may have felt about him at different times, that's not obviously going to help anything. So I just asked, you know, I'd love to sit down and try to figure out, because I think we struggle in working together. I think we need to. I'd love to move past that and know what I'm doing that's contributing to it. So just make it about you, own it. And if the person doesn't like you, then they will see you as the problem. So they'll be like, yeah, you're right. It is things you're doing. So I better explain to you all the ways that you're terrible. So hopefully they'll see it as a good invitation to unload on you all the ways that you're wrong. So we got together, and he listed off a few things that are terrible things that I'm doing. One of them is I have a couple of tattoos, and he hates people with tattoos because they're ignorant and bad people. And I just sat there and I let him say that. And it's like, wow, you know nothing about me. You know nothing about why I may have those tattoos. They have quite a bit of significance to me. And somehow they're not connected to my brain. They're not, there's no direct connection between them. It's not about ignorance. Actually, what you're saying is quite ignorant because you're judging me for them. But I didn't say any of that. I let him speak his piece. And there were a number of things. It's when he brought up going to the gym with this woman. Um, it, I was just like, there's something very off here, and I don't understand what it is. But I know me. I know I'm not contributing to this. So there's something inside of him. And so I just asked him, why do you feel this way about these things? Why does this matter so much to you? And he didn't really have the ability to articulate it. Um, I know he does have a lot of insecurity. He didn't share any of that, but one thing I knew is he tends to get mad at people who are in relationships, and so I made that leap myself. I didn't raise it to him, but what I felt like is he does tend to seek out and be difficult with people who have a significant other, whether they're men or women. Um, and he has always been alone. So he's married now. He has 2 kids, but to that point, mid-20s, never had a girlfriend, never been in a relationship. And clearly there's some self-esteem issues. There's some insecurity around that. And that's what was operating there. And this other stuff, the tattoos and whatnot, he's just reaching for reasons to hate people without recognizing the underlying reason why he's unhappy with them in the first place, because that then comes back about him. If I have a tattoo, he has nothing to do with that. It doesn't make him good or bad. He's not done anything wrong. But if I have a girlfriend and he doesn't like that because he doesn't have one, and then he has to look at himself. And so you recognize there's insecurity at play. And that insecurity can come from any number of places that you probably don't understand. We think people are certain ways. We don't know their backstory. They could have undergone significant trauma as a child. Maybe they were abused. Maybe they were kidnapped. Maybe they lost a parent. There's all sorts of different things that could have happened to them that have framed how they think about life and about themselves at play. It's very complicated what goes on in our brains. And so while he wasn't willing or able to express his happiness that he was seeking, and I'm not sure we could get to a place where we could not ever have any issues, what I did recognize is there's stuff at play that I'm understanding better in hearing how he's talking about how everyone's wronging him, and hearing about the things that he tends to get more worked up about than not. And that helped me to realize it's not actually about me. And I thought it was. I thought he was coming for me all the time, and he just, for whatever reason, it was about me, and he didn't like me, and so he was going to be tough with me. But it's not. It's about him. So he couldn't articulate his happiness or any of that, but he did give me a glimpse into what was operating within him. And that alone gave me enough to change my behavior. So I knew now there's a sensitivity in this guy around being in a relationship. There's a sensitivity around, I'm fairly tall. He's very short. So there's a sensitivity around his height. He also tended to not like people who were over 6 feet tall. It's just all of these things that really point to that insecurity. And so I decided I'm going to be much more sensitive to that, even if it means sometimes I don't talk about things that I would normally have talked about in a group of friends that other people want to talk about. If he's there, I'm going to be sensitive to the fact that that may trigger something in him. And so maybe I'm going to choose a different topic, or I'm not going to engage in something, or I'm just going to be too busy and I'm going to have to go. So I altered my behavior and gave him different things to interact with. We're not friends. We didn't become friends. There were other things that he shared with me in that meeting that really disturbed me about what he likes and what he thinks is appropriate that I don't want to be a part of. He is very critical of people, and he likes to tell them that in a fairly harsh way, and asked me to help him write a letter to a professor about that. And I don't want to behave that way. So I realized I don't really want to be friends with him. I don't want to be a part of the way he's treating people. But I also found the path to not having the difficulty in our interactions anymore. So again, it's not to solve every relationship and make you all best friends, but it did move us to a place where we could be in study groups together, we could work on projects together, things could be copacetic and productive. But I also got the insight that, you know what, this is not someone I should invest time in getting much deeper with and being best friends with, because that's not the kind of person I want to be associated with ultimately in a close way.
Oh,
We all have those in coworkers too. I mean, of course.
no, it's a very, very good example of that. I kept thinking of like people just projecting a lot when you were talking about that. So Bryan, we're out of time, but I mean, yeah, like we could go on for ages, but I encourage everyone here and watching to listen to the podcast that you came on with us, which is super good. And also, how can people find you if they want to get in touch, know more about you? Where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, so you can just go to bryanfalchuk.com, and it's bryanfalchuk.com, and you can learn more about my books, about speaking, coaching work that I do. I post lots of articles there, so if you look in the blog, there's, I don't know, 50, 60 articles all about management and people and culture and ethics and values and the things that make us tick. You know, it's this kind of conversation. This is what I talk about. And I'd love for people to come and reach out if you go, and find me on social media. I'm at Bryan Falchuk everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and I'd love to hear from people.
Well, thank you so much. Really, it's been such a pleasure, and thank you guys all for joining, especially during this midday version of our monthly seminar. And yeah, it's been great. So
Thanks,
have a
everyone.
great rest of the day. And yeah, Bryan, we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bryan. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.